We are ready to start Parshat Mishpatim, a parsha that is so packed with halachot and many different lessons. It was actually difficult to decide which ones we're going to use, but here we go. Right from the very beginning, Chaf Aleph, Aleph Bet, the Eila HaMishpatim Asher Tasim Lefnehem. These are the civil laws that Bnei Israel are going to learn. And what is the first one? Ki Tikneh Eved Ivri. It's about the Hebrew servant, the Hebrew slave that is sold. The halacha is he works for 6 years, goes free in the 7th. Rashi says, what is the case that we're talking about? Miyad Beitin, Shemachru B'gnei. This is a person who stole. He wasn't able to pay back that which he stole, and therefore he has to work. He has to go into someone's home and work off what he owes by being his servant. It's an amazing thing as we go through this story. This is a person who deserves to be punished for what he's done. But there is nowhere in Torah where we do something simply for punishment's sake. The very first law of the civil laws teaches us that the entire goal is not to punish anyone, but it's to rehab, to help a person rehabilitate themselves and become better. This person is going to spend 6 years living in the home of a person who has a functional household, has an income. He's going to learn how to work, how to earn, how to save, how to spend, how to run his own household, and then he goes free afterwards. That's the goal, to rehabilitate the person, not just to punish the person. And this is in general a lesson for how we're supposed to live our lives in parenting, in schools. There's no such thing as just giving a punishment. The truth is, we see this even in the ultimate time of a consequence after a person passes away. We're taught, oh, there's Gehenom, there's a hell, suffering. It sounds like it's all about punishment, and it's not the case. The goal is to cleanse our neshama from whatever stains it, so that we can be free to connect to Hashem in Gan Eden and eventually Olam Haba. So much so that that's how the Mesilat Yesharim explains what tshuva is. How does tshuva work? Hashem is a God of justice. We're supposed to be punished for the things that we do wrong. So how can we ever have tshuva? How can we ever be forgiven? It says in Mesilat Yesharim in Parak Dalid, he says, even though it's a chesed, it doesn't go completely against din. Because if you feel so bad over something that you've done wrong, that's part of your tshuva. There's no need for divine quote-unquote punishment, because that pain itself, the regret, cleanses your neshama from the stain, from that which you've done wrong, and now you're free to connect to Hashem in Olam Haba. There's no such thing as just punishing for the sake of punishing. It's all towards an end. And that's what we see from the very beginning of our parsha with the Eved Ivri. The goal was to rehabilitate the person, get it back on his own feet. Lesson number one for us as parents, we don't just punish our children out of anger. The goal is to try to help them experience a consequence which improves them. School shouldn't just punish for the sake of punishing, but the goal is always to try to get the student to rehabilitate and to improve. That is the Torah perspective on consequences. Lesson number one. Lesson number two, Shemot Chaf Bet, Psukim Chaf Al to Chaf Gimel, Kol Almana Veyatom Lo Ta'anun. Do not in any way mistreat a widow or an orphan, a basic halacha of decency. And if you do, says Hashem, Ki im tza'ok yitzak elai, I am going to hear that cry. V'chara api, and there's going to be quote unquote anger. It's not anger the way we understand human anger, but Hashem says there is going to be a consequence. Again, going back to the consequence that'll be rehabilitative in nature, but I'm going to hear their cry. You didn't have rachamim on them. There's going to be a consequence on you, which doesn't have rachamim. The Rambam goes even further. He says this is a lav she'ein loket alav. There's no makot, but the Torah tells us the punishment. It's going to be Hashem now bringing the consequence to you, mida keneged mida, for what you did to this person. They're going to cry to me. So first of all, we see the power of tefillah. That when this almana or this yatom cries out to Hashem, that there is going to be a reaction from Hashem. He hears the cry and he's going to act on it. But most importantly is the lesson for us in terms of the rachamim that we are supposed to have. A few psukim later, in psukim Chaf Hey, the Chaf Vav, we have a similar idea. What's the halacha there? The halacha there is someone who takes collateral from someone who is not able to pay back the loan immediately. That night, give them back the thing that they need for themselves. They have to cover themselves with it. They need it. But they gave you a sheet, a covering, clothing, whatever it was. You must give that back to them. Because if you don't, if they cry to me, Shamati, I'm going to hear. Ki chanun ani. Hashem says, I am a person of compassion. You don't act with compassion. You take away a basic necessity from someone who's poor. You act improperly towards a widow or an orphan. Hashem says, I'm going to hear it. Says the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, Kuf Nun Aleph Aleph, Kol hamarachem al habriot. If you have compassion on other people, merachem v'lav min hashamayim, you will receive compassion from Hashem. If you don't have compassion towards other people, you will not be the recipient of divine mercy. This is lesson number 2 in our parsha. We need to be people of rachamim, people who are caring, people who are loving, people who act with kindness towards others. Show that rachamim to other people. Don't create a scenario where they're crying out to Hashem for help. You will be the beneficiary of rachamim from Hashem as well. Lesson number 2 from the parsha. We continue with this theme of helping other people as we go to lesson number 3. Chaf bet chaf dalid im kesef talveh et ami et ha'ani imach. If you loan money to someone, the poor person who is with me, lo tia lo kenosheh lo tasimu lav neshach, do not charge interest, and a few other halachot that are learned from here. Says Rashi, et ha'ani shelo tinhog mo minhag bizayon b'hava shehu ami. He's with me, Hashem says. Do not treat this person in any way that degrades him. Imagine that you're the ani. He's with you. He's part of your nation. Look at him that way. And number 3, do not go back to the person you lend money to and bother him and in any way torment him. Make him feel uncomfortable trying to collect from him. If you know he doesn't have it, leave the person alone. 3 halachot in Rashi. Don't treat the person improperly when you lend the money. Look at yourself as if you're the poor person, the way you'd want to be treated in this scenario. And certainly don't go back to him and try to collect if you know that the person doesn't have the ability to do so. This really brings to mind the Rambam, who in Hilchot Matanot Adanim, Perek Vav, Halachot Zayin through Yudal, goes through the 8 categories of tzedakah, one after another. Number 1, if you can create a scenario where the person needs no more help, giving him a job, giving him a skill. Number 2, everything's anonymous. He does not know who he's getting it from. You don't know who you're giving it to. Number 3, the giver knows who he's giving it to, but the poor person does not know who he's getting it from. Number 4, the poor person knows who he's getting it from, but you don't know who you're giving it to. Number 5, give to someone before they even ask. Number 6, you give it to someone after they've asked you for it. Number 7, you give less than the person probably needs, but you do it with a happy and pleasant face. And finally, number 8, you give it without that happy face. These are the levels of tzedakah. The bottom line lesson over here, though, put aside how much you have, how you arrange it. It's the attitude that you have when you give tzedakah. You can give all the money in the world, but if you do it with an unpleasant demeanor, if you in any way make the poor person feel uncomfortable, that is not what Hashem wants in giving tzedakah. We see that very clearly from the pasuk in this week's parsha and the Rashi, and all these levels from the Rambam. And that is going to be lesson number 3. Yes, we should be people who give tzedakah, but do it with simcha. Do it with happiness. Do it in a respectful manner to the poor person. And that is the ultimate way to fulfill tzedakah. Lesson number 4. Continuing with halachot that relate to helping people. Chaf Gimel, pasuk Hey, Ki tir'eh chamor sanacha ravatz tachat masa'o. If you see someone's donkey and the donkey is suffering because the load is too strong, v'chadalta mi'azov lo azov ta'azov imo. You should help. You see the animal of this person that's suffering, you should help. Now the Sefer HaChinuch understands that this is talking about helping another person. He doesn't mention anything at all about the animal. He says, you learn from over here a very important lesson, not just care about other people's health and mental well-being, even their possessions, right? Someone else's animal is suffering, you go help. That's part of the mitzvah of chesed, is to be there for other people when it comes to their possessions. That's the way the Sefer HaChinuch understands it. But comes along Rashi, Masachat Shabbat, Kuf Chav Chet, Amud Bet. Rashi says this halacha is the source, this pasuk is the source for tsar balei chayim da'araita, that preventing an animal from unnecessary suffering is a mitzvah in the Torah. Look where we've gone. We've gone from rehabilitating the human being who was robbing in the very beginning of the parsha. We moved our way to helping poor people, and now we're going to an extra level of the compassion that we're supposed to have and the mitzvah from the Torah of tsar balei chayim. You see an animal that's suffering under a load, under a burden, go and help the animal. That's the way Rashi understands that this pasuk means tsar balei chayim. There are many sources in the Torah that relate to this issue of tsar balei chayim. We have the halacha of not having a shore and a donkey plowed together. There's two elements of tsar balei chayim there. One is that the ox is stronger and therefore it'll make the donkey work way too hard and it can't keep up, making the donkey suffer. Or because the ox chews its cud, the donkey will look over and see the ox constantly, continuously eating while he doesn't have food. That's going to cause tsar to the animal. We have halacha from the Torah of tsar balei chayim. We actually talk about it every day when we say Shema. We say that Hashem will bless us with rain and we'll have crops to feed our animals and to feed ourselves. And we learn the halacha from there that we feed our animals first because of tsar balei chayim. The animal shouldn't see that you're eating it. It hasn't been fed yet. That's the sensitivity that we have to have even to the animals. And hopefully if we have that sensitivity even towards the animals, that will obviously cross over to the rest of our lives as well. That is lesson number 4 from this week's Parsha, the importance of tsar balei chayim, to make sure that we play no part at all in causing any animals unnecessary suffering. Another halacha, another lesson that's learned from this pasuk, says the Kli Yakar. It said, azov to azov imo. You're supposed to get involved and to help the animal together with the animal's owner. Says the Kli Yakar, im yoshev lo va'omer ho va'alecha mutal davar chayav ata lakim levad. If the owner is sitting on the side and he says, I don't have to help my donkey, you're the one who has the mitzvah from the Torah to go and help out. If that is his attitude, it says, according to Kli Yakar, in that situation, you do not have to help. Your responsibility to help comes when the other person is helping as well. This sounds like he's veering away from the tsar balei chayim and focusing more on helping a fellow human being. Only help him if he's also helping. And now the Kli Yakar takes it one step further. And he says the same thing applies in a case of tzedakah, if there's a poor person. And he goes into detail and he says, if the poor person is making zero effort to have money on their own, they're not trying to work, they're not trying to do anything to put themselves together, says the Kli Yakar, in that situation, you do not have the obligation of tzedakah. An amazing, amazing insight that he learns from our pasuk. Yes, we want to be balei tzedakah. Yes, we want to be people who do chesed, but there's a limit to that as well in terms of your obligation. If you want to help the person, you can help the person. But if they're not helping themselves, you don't have the obligation to step in and help. And by the way, one could argue you're actually hurting them in that situation, because then they're simply learning to be takers, simply learning to be dependent and not learning how to be independent on their own and take control of their own lives. And that is a critical lesson. We've been talking about chesed and the importance of going and helping people, but it's limited, because if they're not helping themselves, you do not have the obligation to do so. The Sefer HaChinuch actually understands that to be the basis for another mitzvah in this week's parsha, related to a judge, shelo yachmol hadayan al chalash v'hadal b'shat din, that a judge, a dayan, should not have rachmanut on a poor or weak person who comes before him in a court case, Ela sheyadin dinola amito. You have a responsibility to teach the true psak halacha. If the wealthy person is supposed to win, he has to win. Lo al tzad chemla. Do not show compassion in that case, but you have to have them be equal. The poor person and the wealthy person, the strong person and the weak person. Shenemar v'dal lo tehadar b'rivo. Chesed has its limits. You might think to yourself, what's the big deal? The poor person has to give tzedakah anyway. This is a way of arranging it. I'll cause the poor person to win. The rich person will pay them. And then we have tzedakah, a wonderful thing. No. You have to follow the truth, and you have to cause the poor person to lose the case if they deserve to lose the case. So now we have an interesting lesson number 5. Yes, there's chesed, but not to the extent where you're going so far that either he should lose the court case and doesn't, or that you're helping him when he's not helping himself, which is actually teaching us the deeper level of chesed, because you're hurting the person in that case. You might think you're helping them, but by giving and giving and giving and not putting them in a situation of responsibility, you're actually hurting them. Lesson number 5, yes to chesed, but no to chesed, or it's not chesed, no helping if the person is not helping himself or if he deserves to lose in that court case as well. That actually connects on a certain level to lesson number 6. Torah teaches us in Shemot Chav Gimel Pasuk Zayin, Midvar Sheker Tirchak. From a falsehood, from lying, you should distance yourself. There is no other situation in the Torah where it uses that language of tirchak, of distance yourself. We have other halachot which tell us how to stay away from certain averot, but the Torah itself saying stay away from this only when it comes to sheker. It relates to the previous halacha, because you have to follow the truth in the court case and not go against it and go with sheker. Says the Gemara in Sota Membet Amud Aleph, Amr B'Yirmiyah Bar Abba, Arba Kitot Ein Mekabel Pnei Shechina. There are 4 groups that are not able to connect and greet God's presence and connect to Hashem, and one of them is Kat Shkarim, people who are liars, and it quotes the pasuk, Dover Shkarim Lo Yichon L'Naged Einai. Hashem can't tolerate someone who lies. The Gemara in Shabbat Nun Hey Amud Aleph says, Chotamo Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Emet. The seal of God is truth. Our whole lives, as we search for God and try to connect to God, are supposed to be about searching for truth. Sheker cannot play a role in that situation. Says the Midrash, Beita Rabbi Kiva, Sheker Ein Lo Raglayim, Shekol Ha'otiot Shel Sheker Omdim Al Chudan. If you look at it carefully, the letters of Sheker, the way they're written, right? They don't stand on their own. The shin, the kuf, the resh, they stand on one leg. They don't have the ability to withstand anything that comes its way, as opposed to emet, which has letters that are constructed in a way where they stand on solid ground with 2 legs on the ground. Sheker Ein Lo Raglayim doesn't last. And more importantly, it's something which is not the way we're supposed to be living our lives. We're supposed to look for emes, truth, which is long-lasting, as opposed to sheker, which doesn't have the ability to last. We're supposed to live our lives with truth. We're supposed to pursue HaKadosh Baruch Hu as we search for truth. And that is why midvar sheker tirchak. Stay away from sheker. Stay away from lying. All that does is put you further and further away from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's why the Torah specifically uses that terminology for this halacha. Lesson number 6, let's be people who pursue truth, and by extension, the truth of Hashem, His existence in Torah, and the ultimate meaning of life, and not be people who get dragged into sheker, which then pulls us away from that truth and living a life filled with falsehood. Moving on to lesson number 7, Shmot Chav Gimel Yud Bet, Sheshet Yamim Ta'aseh Ma'asecha, for 6 days a week, do your work, Uvayom Hashvi'i Tishbot. But then on the 7th day, you should rest. That word Tishbot is used by the commentaries to understand a dimension of Shabbat. First of all, the Rambam, Hilchot Shabbat Chaf Aleph Aleph, Nemer Batorah Tishbot, Afilu Midvarim She'ena Melacha. Even if it's not one of the 39 melachot, you're supposed to rest from them. This was the basis for the sages, adding on all kinds of rabbinic laws, Mehen dvarim asurim she'hen domim lemalachot. It might appear like you're doing a melacha. Some of them are gzeira shemiyavo mehen yisr skila. Maybe it'll lead you to do a melacha. That's one level of tishbot, is the rabbinic laws of Shabbat to prevent us from doing averot. But the Sforno says in this pasuk, what does it mean when it says tishbot? Afilu b'dvarim she'enam melacha. Even things that are not melacha, aval him torach b'derech chol. It's weekday activity. When it says tishbot, when it says to rest, it's telling us to refrain on Shabbat from being involved in activity that is similar to the way we act during the week. The Rambam says this as well in Hilchot Shabbat, Chaf Dal and Aleph. Yesh dvarim she'hen asarim b'Shabbat, afal pi she'enam domim malacha. They're not related at all to any of the malachot. They're not going to bring you to do a malacha. But Shabbat is supposed to be a different type of day than the rest of the week. Tishbot, not just physically resting, but stepping away from the week, not being involved in those activities. That should impact the way we talk on Shabbat, what we talk about on Shabbat. It should impact how we act on Shabbat. It's a day where it's supposed to be a clear distinction that it's a day of holiness. Tishbot. Put aside the weekday, put aside the talk about work, put aside the talk about earning money. Do whatever you can to be involved in words of Kedusha, in words of spirituality, and connecting with family, talking with family about the things that are important and that are meaningful, and re-engaging. But really putting aside the wheeling and dealing that we do during the rest of the week. That is the meaning of Tishbot, lesson number 7. Not just the halachot of Muktzah, but also all these other aspects of making sure that Shabbat is not the way it is during the rest of the week. We now move on to the Torah's description of Matan Torah, of the giving of the Torah. We had the 10 Commandments, the Aseret Dibrot, last week's Parsha, but now it describes the exact process of Moshe going up and actually getting the Sefer Torah. We're in Chav Dalad Gimel. Vayavo Moshe vayisaper la'am et kol divrei Hashem. Moshe shares the words of the Torah with the nation, all the laws. Vaya'an kol ha'am kol echad. The nation says in one voice, Vayomru kol advarim asher diber Hashem na'aseh. Everything that Hashem has told us, we will do. Not na'aseh v'nishma, na'aseh, we will do. Then a few psukim later, Moshe actually gets the Sefer Torah in Chav Dalad Zayin. Vayikach Sefer Habrit, Vayikra Ba'aznei Ha'am. He takes the Torah, they now have it, he transmits it to the people. Vayomru, and now they say, Kol asher diber Hashem, all that Hashem said, na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and we will hear, the famous words. Now, think about this for a moment. There are two distinctions in what Bnei Israel cried out from before the Torah was actually given to them to after they received the Torah. Before the Torah was given to them, first they only said na'aseh, we will do it. And it emphasizes that they said that b'kol echad, in one voice. After the Torah is given, you no longer have that reference to kol echad. It no longer mentions the one voice. And they say na'aseh and nishma. What is going on over here? What's the meaning behind this? Why the distinction between the two chants, the two mottos, the two acts of pride that we talk about of Bnei Israel, of their declaration? One time na'aseh, the other time na'aseh v'nishma, one time kol echad, one time not. Why? I want to share with you a beautiful answer from my great-grandfather, Rav Elimelech Fishman, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Vracha, who was killed in Auschwitz-Birkenau in Shavuot in 1944. And he left behind his Sefer Lechem Abir Malatorah, which we're blessed to learn as his great-grandchildren and his great-great-grandchildren. Unbelievable thing. And he says a beautiful answer to this question. We all know the story in the Masechet Shabbat, Daf Lamed Aleph and Aleph, where a non-Jew comes before Shammai and he says, Gaireni, convert me. Tell me the whole Torah while I'm standing on one foot. Shammai pushes him out and says, what are you talking about? You can't convert to Judaism if you want to hear all of Torah while you're on one foot. Balifnei Hillel, he comes in front of Hillel and Gaire. Hillel converts him. Unbelievable. Not only does Hillel convert him, Amarlai, he says, here's all of Torah on one foot. Da Allah Sani l'chavrecha lo tavid. What you dislike, don't do to somebody else. Do not act to someone else in a way that you do not want to be acted towards yourself. The idach perusha, the rest of the Torah is an explanation of this. Zil gemor, go and learn it. What is going on over here? First of all, what is the question of the demand of the ger? Convert me while I hear all of Torah while standing on one foot. Just strange terminology. And then Hillel's answer, really, all of Torah is just about to love other people like yourself. Don't do to others what you don't want done to yourself. And the rest of the Torah is just an explanation of that. Is that really accurate? What is going on over here? There are commentaries that answer that when he asked to teach him all of Torah while on one foot, regel means leg, but regel can also mean time. We go to the Beit HaMikdash in the Shalosh Regalim, that's in this week's Parsha, 3 times that we go to the Beit HaMikdash in the year for the holidays. Bilam's donkey said, why are you hitting me? That's 3 times, Regalim. You've hit me 3 times using the word Regalim. Regel means time. What was he asking? He was saying, I want to become Jewish, but I want to reach completion in one lifetime. I don't want to have to come back in some kind of a reincarnated state to fulfill all of Torah. I don't want that. So I'll only convert if there's a way to keep all of Torah while you're in one lifetime, because generally that's not the case, right? There are certain halachot that are just for men, just for women, just for kohanim, just for kings. There are situational halachot. No one can keep all the mitzvot in one lifetime. But that's what he was asking from, and therefore he understood that we have to come back reincarnated to fulfill the whole Torah. But he asked Hillel, is there a way? And Hillel says, yes, there are 2 ways, say those commentaries. One of them being the Torah at Moshe. He says, first of all, what are we taught? Mesachet Shvuot, Lametet Amud Aleph, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Lazeh. All Jews are responsible for one another. That goes as far as when I do one mitzvah, if we really are one unit, the one mitzvah that I do can count for you, and the mitzvah that you do can count for me. That's part of this mutual responsibility that we have for one another. So when he said to him, when he said to him, don't do to others what you don't want to be done to yourself, he was saying, achdut, unity, arvut, you're responsible for one another. That's one of the ways that you can fulfill the entire Torah in one lifetime. Because if you really are one harmonious unit, all of our doing all of mitzvot, they count for each other. The idach perusha, the other way to fulfill the entire Torah in one lifetime, zil gemor, go and learn Torah. Go and learn. The Gemara says, Mesachet Menachot, Kuf Yud Amud Aleph, Kol ha'osek b'Torah chatat, anybody who learns the halachot of the korban chatat, ki ilu hikriv chatat. It's as if you brought a korban chatat. And it goes on all the korbanot that way. Learning the halachot, that's as if you're fulfilling the mitzvah. So you want another way to keep the entire Torah? Do it by learning Torah. Because if you learn all of Torah, it's as if you fulfilled all of Torah. Based on that, my great-grandfather brings up back to our pasuk. The first time they make a declaration, they don't have a Torah in their hands at that point to learn. All they have is the ability to do. And that's why they were trying to make a proclamation that we are accepting upon ourselves to do the entire Torah. How can that be? B'kol echad na'aseh. In one voice, they said, we will do. And because it's one voice, because we have unity, the mitzvah that I do counts for you. The mitzvah that you do counts for me. That's one way we can fulfill the entire Torah. Once they had the Torah, it was given to them, then there's another way they can do it. It doesn't have to be b'kol achad. Obviously, that's an ideal that we want to strive for. But na'aseh v'nishma. Nishma means learning. We will do the mitzvah. We will learn the Torah. And that's the other way that we can fulfill the entire Torah. That's the way he understands these 2 psukim. Lesson number 8, we want to be people who really are fulfilling the entire Torah. There's 2 ways for us to do it. Number 1, through achdut, to really show love one to the other, and then the mitzvah that we do count for one another, and through learning Torah. Not just learning Torah, but learning all of Torah. And that's how we can make our na'aseh and na'aseh v'nishma declarations by fulfilling that in our lifetimes through learning all of Torah, and it's as if we kept the entire Torah. Lesson number 8. Finally, lesson number 9, we go to Chaf Daled Yud Bet. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe. Hashem says to Moshe, Alei Elai Hahara, come up to me in the mountain, vehayesham, and be there, and I'll give you the luchot and the Torah and the mitzvah. There's some extra words in this pasuk. He said, go up the mountain. Why does he have to say vehayesham and be there? Says the Kotzker Rebbe, from here we have a proof that you can work hard, you can climb the mountain, you can reach the mountaintop and reach the highest point, but you can be there, velo liyot sham, and not to be there. Hu omeid alahar aval rosho natum b'makom acher. You can be standing at the top of the mountain, the greatest spiritual heights of the most beautiful physical experience, but you're not present. You're not there. Ha'ikar einaha aliyah. What's most important is not going up, ela liyot sham, but to be there, to be present. Says the Kotzker Rebbe, that is what Hashem is telling Moshe. It's not just the physical act of going to the top of Har Sinai and getting the Torah. You can experience all of that without being there. Hey Yesham, Moshe, be there. Take it all in. Make it a part of yourself. Be in the moment. And that is lesson number 9. To make sure that in our experiences in our lives, we're not just going through the motions, but we're there. We're present. It's not enough just to show up to shul, to yeshiva, to whatever it is, to whatever meaningful experience you're going to. Showing up is not enough. You have to be there, be present, take it all in, and that's the way that it has an impact on your life. Lesson number 9 from the Parsha. Let's go through all the lessons that we just learned from this week's Parsha, starting with lesson number 1, the Eved Ivri. We are not about punishment. It's consequences in order to help a child, a student, ourselves to be better people. Lesson number 2, to be people of rachamim and compassion to the widow, to the orphan, in all circumstances, anything we can do to help people. And if we have rachamim on other people, Hashem will have rachamim on us. Lesson number 3, to give the tzedakah, but give the tzedakah with the right attitude. In Kesef Talveh et Ami, as Rashi pointed out, as the Rambam points out, it's not just enough to give the money to tzedakah, but to do it with the right intentions, to do it with a smile, to do it with an appreciation that we have the opportunity to help someone else. Lesson number 4, the halacha of a donkey that's crushed under this burden to go and help. Tsar balei chayim, to make sure that we are not only kind to other human beings, to be kind to animals as well, and make sure they do not experience any unnecessary suffering. But there's also lesson number 5, the kliyakar in this pasuk, where he says it's only if the owner is helping you as well. If he's not helping you as well, you don't have an obligation to help him. We also learned that from the halacha of the dayan, who's judging a case. There's no difference between the wealthy and the strong and the weak and the poor. We're searching for truth. It's not doing a service to the poor person to give him a benefit in this kind of a situation. It's upon him to try to make his life better as well. Lesson number 5, that chesed has its limits, and make sure that we're not hurting the person when we think we're doing a chesed. Lesson number 6, going on to Dvar Sheker Tirchak, stay away from lying. It only uses terminology in the Torah about this point. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not allow the Shekhinah to be perceived by the group of liars. Chotamosh al Kadosh Baruch Hu emet. Let's remember that lying is not only bad in and of itself, but it also distances ourselves from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Moving on to lesson number 7, Tishbot on Shabbat. Shabbat should not be like a weekday. It's not just about the actual halachot of the malachot, but in everything, in how we talk and how we act, what we focus on. It's a day of kodesh and spirituality and meaning, and not like a regular weekday. Lesson number 8, the beautiful explanation of my great-grandfather when it comes to Matan Torah. First, it was kol echad na'aseh. Then it was na'aseh v'nishma without the kol echad. There's 2 ways that we can fulfill the entire Torah in our lifetimes. Number 1, through unity and harmony, and Kol Yisrael, the mitzvah that I do counts for you, and vice versa. And number 2, by learning all of Torah, it counts as if we fulfilled the entire Torah. And then finally, lesson number 9, Hashem says to Moshe, you go up to Har Sinai, Hayesham, be there, be present. Be there, focusing on the experiences that are happening to us in our lives. It's not just about going through the motions. We only truly gain from everything that's happening if we are present and we are there. Let's make sure to be people who act in that manner. Let's try to learn from one or all the lessons of this week's Parsha. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining us.